Do you think it's dead? The human gendarme sat motionless at his seat. His arms were crossed and his head was laid back on the shutter wall. It had been like this for hours. The Spectalian started to shuffle the cards once more, and reply back to the inquisitive elf. It was only natural. This was the elf's first time travelling out in space. Well, if you want to find out, be my guest. The Spectalian slowly turned his head and looked at the gendarme. Motionless as always. The Spectalian shaked his head. I'm not going to mess with it. We've learned our lesson as a species, especially with those particular humans. Those humans? The Spectalian pointed to the column of patches that were sewn on the gendarme's right arm. They were all circular and of the same area, yet none looked like the other. According to those, the gendarme's a Victal, a war veteran, a Zaltan Oblast citizen, and a NIF party member, some of the most hardcore of the hardcore humanity has to offer. This didn't have the effect that the Spectalian thought it would have on the elf. The elf was rather unimpressed. I have no idea what any of that means. The Spectalian sighed, or at least the interpretation apparatus sighed. He leaned forward and stared directly at the elf. The elf gulped and held her breath. The towering figure of the Spectalians always did make her nervous. Well, being a war veteran is obvious. The only war that happened in their lifetimes is the Frontier War. The elf thought for a few moments, trying to recall what the Spectalian was saying. Once she remembered, she spoke up. Wait, are you talking about that coalition war against the humans? Yes. The one where humans kept on dying so much that they were landing down on human corpses? Yes. The Spectalian pointed to the second patch. A large human symbol encompasses much of the patch. According to that human was on the 5th wave. I don't remember the exact casualty rate for that one, but it was high. Some 70% perhaps? Out of all the humans who died, that gendarme survived. It's telling. The elf lay silent. After all, how was one supposed to respond to a comment like that? Noting the elf's silence, the Spectalian continued on. Zaltan Oblast is notorious in our homeland, more infamous than the human country it makes up. They were the main opposition and enemy during the chronic Revolutionary War, our first contact with those humans. They were ruthless. We didn't understand their way of conflict at all. Instead of engaging one-on-one, face-to-face like all our other battles, they followed a fighting philosophy called hit and run. They would hide behind an obstacle, such as a tree or rock, take shots at our most valuable personnel, and run away once we got our asses off the ground. We considered it to be a cheap, dishonorable tactic. Only recently have we acknowledged their superior engagement rules, especially once we learned what they were equipped with. They practically beat us with the equivalent of sticks and stones. The Spectalian then pointed to the green and black patch. For this one, the elf could interpret the symbols. It was a capital I going down straight through a capital N. The National Identity Front had a truce with the People's Liberation Front during the Second Crosin War to fight us and the Crosin. I dare say it was worse than the Frontier War, much worse. After they forced us to surrender, our former ally, the Crosin, started to utilize NBC material. The Spectalian stopped speaking when it noticed the elf's confusion. Nuclear, biological, chemical. The elf let out a silent, "Oh." The Spectalian continued. Yeah, it was pretty bad. You see all the armor that gendarme's wearing, right? How could the elf not? The black armor covered all parts of the human. Not even the head was spared. In its place was a ballistic gas mask for the face, and a metallic helmet for the head. The elf heard rumors that the lenses glowed a dim red whenever they felt bloodlust. The human world, Lonsk, is still contaminated to this day. The realization dawned upon the elf. Wait, you're not telling me their soldiers have been wearing that since that war? The Spectalian laughed, or at least the device did. No, I'm telling you that all humans have been wearing armor since the war. Never is there a moment where they don't wear their armor, or at least that I've seen. Heard if they take it off, they croak. So many people did when the Crossing started to use NBC material. It's so ingrained in their brains, they don't even take it off, even if they're off-world. The elf looked once more at the gendarme. She couldn't imagine wearing armor for her entire life. How would she tend to her scales? Her tail? The Spectalian continued on with his talk. At this point, the elf wondered if the Spectalian was saying all of this just to explain it to her. After the war ended, the PLF collapsed and the NIF took control of the human lands. They still remain in power to this day. The Spectalian then pointed at the last symbol. It was the capital letter V, with a sword going down through it. That one might be the most significant. Victol has fought in every human war since the Second Crossen War. Nowadays, with wars between alien species seemingly ending, they retool themselves, offering their services abroad. It's not so much their gear that defines them, but rather their behaviour. They represent the best and worst humanity has to offer. Finally done explaining all the patches, the Spectalians leaned back on the wall. It and the elf sat in silence for a while, listening to the hums the shuttle made. Yeah, for a rather mediocre species, they sure have been through a lot. The Spectalian then leaned forward and rested his head on his tentacles. Perhaps too much. Now that I think of it, I can't remember a time where they haven't been at war. Yeah, it sure seems like we love war, no? The elf and the Spectalian turned towards the Gendarme. It was as still as ever. Was I just imagining it, or... No, you're not. The Spectalian and the elf looked at each other, then at the human Gendarme. Wait, have you been... I've been awake this entire time. Don't know why you would think otherwise. The Gendarme then stood up and looked straight at the Spectalian. The Spectalian slid back on his seat a bit. Overall, I'd give it a 6 out of 10. Okay explanation, but you left out a lot of stuff. Makes us seem like monsters or something. The human Gendarme started to chuckle a bit. The elf was feeling anything but amusement. The human then started to stretch. Well, since you explained some of them, might as well go for the whole package, no? Want to hear your take on it? The Gendarme then turned around, his back facing the two. It was completely covered in patches, cloths and chits. After some moments passed, the elf hesitantly raised her hand. The human Gendarme laughed. This isn't a damn school, you don't have to raise your hand like you need to go use the bathroom. Well, my question is, you've done a lot of things. I didn't know we were accompanied by such an accomplished human senior. The human Gendarme tilted his head. Senior? God damn. Didn't know I exuded such an aura of matureness. I'm only 26.